Welcome to another video. In this video, I have solved this question in a holistic manner so that you understand how to solve it in small amount of time in the GATE examination. Okay, so let's solve this question. The question states that consider an array x. So x is an array that contains n positive integers. Okay, so we know that any element of x is going to be an element of positive integers, and the len of x, that is the length of x, is given to be equal to n. Okay, a subarray of x is defined to be a sequence of array locations with consecutive indexes. Right, consecutive indexes means that indexes which come one after the other. Right, any number sequence that comes made of consecutive numbers, that numbers which are increasing one after the other. Right, 1 2 3 is one order, 0 1 2 3 is another. Right, note that there is no restriction as to the size of the subarray, so the whole original array can also be considered as a subarray. Right, so that part is also present. Right, this definition comes from string actually. That it's similar notation, kind of similar notion. Right, now they say that the C code snippet given below, this is the C code snippet that they have given, right, written, computes the length of the longest subarray of x that contains at most two distinct integers. Right, so this line over here is an extremely important line because it tells the intent of the code. Right, see, we are all programmers, and given enough time we would be able to interpret it, we would be able to find P and Q. There is no problem in that, everybody can do that. But the thing is, the trick is, the challenge is to solve it in short amount of time, so that the marks you gain from this in the GATE examination is actually meaningful. Solve this in 1 hour in your GATE examination, and the marks that you lost by not solving other questions is going to be much more hampersome than the marks whatever you get from this. Right, the operation is successful but the patient is dead. That is the kind of thing that would happen if you spend too much time on this. So the question is, random interpretation can be done on this and you will get the answer, but the thing is, we have to solve it in small amount of time. So I have basically used every single trick in the book to reduce the time to solve this, and I will explain it in details. Right, so that is one thing, but the only way to do that is, first of all, let me make this a simple point that we all know at a gut level, but I will just provide I will just express it. Right, and that is, if you understand the intent of the code, that intent helps you in understanding the algo. Right, now algo expressed in a more verbose manner, right, expressed in more exact terms, with more words used, gives us a programming language. Right, program gives us a program. Right, because a program cannot be ambiguous, while algo can be expressed in human language, so it can be a lot more ambiguous. Right, that is the whole thing. But the thing that I'm about to say is, if you take the intent and use it to parse out the information that is present in your algo or in your program, that is going to help you. The intent is going to help you parse out through all of the verbosity. Right, that is what I want to say. So the intent right over here is given to us, and understand the intent very well and then attack the problem with that intent. That is one technique to reduce the amount of time in interpretation of the code. Right, so let's read it together. Compute the longest length of the longest subarray of x that contains at most two distinct elements. Right, at most, not two distinct elements, at most. Right, so distinct elements would be less than equal to 2. Right, all similar elements also come under this category. Right, to express this idea more fully, I've given examples over here. This subarray is constituted of 3 distinct elements, so this is not a valid subarray in this context. Right, this contains 3 elements and it is constituted of 2 distinct elements, so this is correct one. This is also the similar, and this is correct one. While this one does not contain 2 distinct elements, but because this less than equal to relationship was there, so this is also a correct example. Right, once this part is very clear, so we know the intent of the code. Right, once that part is done, we can you can interpret the code from this angle. Right, if you do that, it is going to reduce your time. Now one more technique that I'm going to use. Right, high quality code, when it is writing code, is art. Right, so in art you do symbolisms, you do sequencing, you do beautification. Right, so when that is done, then the sequence in which the variables are defined, right, it is sequence is defined from this direction. Right, first we define the first variable, then we define the second variable, then we define the len variable, len1 variable, then len2 variable, then max len. Right, So the order in which the variables are defined gives us information regarding the fundamental variables, that right, the first is the fundamental variable on whose definition the second one was defined, on whose definition the len one was defined. I know the equal to sign does not really contain first, here, or does not contain second here, I know, but in the usage of the program, that is what we intend to do. This first variable is in that, from this angle, this vintage point, from this interpretation, holds more fundamental properties than this one, because it is used in a semantic manner to define what second is doing, right? So interpret it in that direction. So first interpret whereof first this variable is used, and then interpret whereof this variable is used, and like that, right? But also read the whole question, because the intent of len1 and len2 is already provided. That is what we are trying to do now. We are trying to interpret the intent of first, the intent of second, right? So the code given below, and P and Q we have to find. So P and Q are the things that we have to find, right? After that, they are given that which one of the following options is the correct missing. Basically, the value of P and Q are given over here. We can use the options also. I will use that also, right? Now the hint that's provided to us is at the end of the ith iteration, right? So this is a for loop in which the variable I is varied, right? From 0 to less than n, so n minus 1, and I is incremented by 1 at every single step. So the values that it is going to take is going to be 0, 1, 2, and then going on till n minus 1, right? This is the values that that is going to take. We can now just cross this, because we will not take it. We will directly go from this from now on, right? At the end of ith iteration, right? At the end of ith iteration, right over here, right over here, it is given that len1 is the length of the longest subarray ending with xi, right? So longest subarray ending with xi that contains all equal values. Okay, so here the distinct variables, the distinct values were less than equal to 2. Right over here it is given that all equal variables, right? So whatever is the value of xi at the current ith iteration, and preceding number of times, the number of times xi is going to come is that we have to count that, and that is going to be the value of len1 at this location. Okay, that is one thing that was given to us. Now len2 is the length of the longest subarray ending with xi that contains at most 2 distinct values. Okay, so at most is used over here, and it is similar to the original intent of the code. Okay, fine. So let's take the xi. This is the current ith iteration value of xi, and preceding this there could be any number of xi at any location, or there could be one other symbol, let's say y, and its length is going to be calculated, and that length is going to be equal to what? It's going to be equal to len2, right? At which point? At the end of the ith iteration, right? So intent of the code, intent of len1 and len2 is already provided to us, right? Intent of len1 and len2 is already provided to us. We do not need to interpret that. But for first and second, we will have to do that. And how are you going to understand the intent of the code? You will have to see where all that variable was used at. That is the only way you can understand the intent, right? But what you can understand a person by the actions that he take on a regular basis, right? So that is the kind of thing. Variables are defined by people for a particular purpose inside a context, right? So inside that context, what are the different purposes that this particular variable is taking will show you the intent of this variable, right? So that is what I am going to do. So I have marked out the places at which the first was is being used, right? It is used over here to defined as initial value is 0. Okay, and then it is compared to xi. Okay, what is xi? Xi at the initial point is going to be pointing to the first variable in our array, right? In our array, that is correct, and the first is compared to it, right? So the value of first, this is, let's say this represents first. Initially it has the value of 0, right? So this first is going to be compared with this xi. So whatever value it is going to contain, it is not going to be first. And why is that? Let me remind you, at the very starting it was mentioned that any variable that is belonging to x must be a positive integer, and 0 is not a positive integer, right? So that part I do think is very clear. So it is never going to be equal to first at the first iteration, right? Likewise, the else if part, in that part I will not interpret right now. Only first is being interpreted, right? So first is going to hold. First of all, first is going to hold values that are comparable to xi, right? So it is comparable to xi, so it is going to hold variables, hold values that are stored in this array. That is the first hint that we're going to get, right? Let's look at the second use. So first is being used as the value that is assigned to second, right? As I said, right, first is as a fundamental variable and second is a variable that is defined on top of that from in a semantic point of view, right? So and that is this sentence and this second over here are similar, and then first is assigned the value of xi directly at the end of the ith iteration, right? At the end of ith iteration, first is assigned the value of xi, right? And then the iteration would end and the control will go back to the top. At that point, xi is going to be pointing to the next one, right? So we can understand that the first variable is basically holding the value that is just preceding to that which xi was holding, right? So that is what it is holding at every single, because this statement is outside of any if condition, right? So this is a kind of property that if the first will always hold, first holds the value of just the preceding variable that x had in the previous iteration. That is the intent of first. So I know what is the intent of holds previous iteration xi value. That is the intent of first, right? We understood the intent of first. Now let's understand the intent of second, right? So where all are the places where second is used? Second is used here as equals to 0. Fine, it is given the value of 0 at the starting. That is okay with me, right? Just as first was given the value of 0. And after that, if we came over here and then compared xi with second, so second also holds values that are going to be in this array, okay? And then the second is assigned the value of first when xi was equal to second, okay? At the initial step, because second was pointing to 0 and xi is positive integers, so it is never going to be equal at the first iteration, okay? That part is given, but and then second is equals to first, okay? So now we can say the second is assigned the value of first. These two are exactly the same, right? These two are exactly the same, and they are the only assignation operation that is performed on second, right? And both of them are doing what? It is basically storing the value of first in second, and they are doing this inside of if blocks, right? So is there a kind of distinction that we can draw? Understanding intent is either it is on this side, either it is on this side, right? So this if condition right over here, if true, then these basically do not manipulate second, right? But if it is false, then either this is going to be executed or this else is going to be executed. In both of them, this statement is going to be executed, right? So what this means is that suppose that xi is pointing to 3 and first is pointing to 3 just before that, we are comparing first to xi. If they are equal, then we do not change second at all. But suppose that xi was 4 and first is 3, they are not equal, then we are assigning second the value of what? The value of first, current value of first. And then the code goes on, and then first is assigned the value of the current xi, right? And then xi is incremented. Okay, so this kind of property is what second is holding. So second is holding the value of the first, that is the previous iteration's value is stored in second it is basically at the end of the iteration only, because second is not manipulated after that, right? Neither manipulated nor used, right? Once it is assigned, then it is neither manipulated nor used. So it is as well as can be said at the end of the for statement, it is basically being assigned. It can be interpreted like that. It is a valid interpretation given the condition that the current xi is not equals to fi, right? That is the one fundamental thing. So we can write the intent of second. We have basically interpreted it. So the intent of second is it stores, used to store the value of first, right, at which first and xi was not same. That is what it is holding, right? Because it is only going to be assigned when this condition is not met, right? So it stores the value of first when first is not equals to xi. That is the intent of second. Fine. We have understood that. Fine. So let's move on with that intent. We know the intent of first and second, and we were given the intent of len1 and len2, right? What is the intent of maxlen? Where is maxlen used in the whole code? Maxlen is used in the whole code from starting till the end. This is the part where maxlen is used, right? And it comes inside of a if condition that is corresponding to len2. Okay, fine. So it is len2 is going to be compared to maxlen, and then maxlen is going to be assigned the value of len2 if len2 is greater than maxlen. Fine. All this is fine and good, but the thing that I would like to say is this maxlen is then not used, right? This maxlen is then not used to affect the value of len1 and len2. And we are only concerned with the value of len1 and len2 because those are the values in which p and q are assigned to, right? So we do not need to consider maxlen anymore, right? One more technique, removing the variables that we do not need to consider to basically scopifying, right? Increasing your scope and your visuals on the target and removing the non-important stuff, right? So this is not important in our analysis so far as we want to find p and q. So all the variables intents have been gone through, right? So now we can directly go on the code with the initial value. This is the initial condition, right? Xi is pointing to the first variable of the array. First and second are both equal to 0, and len1 and len2 are basically equal to 0. So let me give out len1 and len2 because they are going to be varying, right? They have intention, we know their intention, and we can directly operate on that intention, right? So at the first iteration of this array, right, what is going to happen? Also, one more technique. I do not need only fill out first two variables, right? We as humans can perceive patterns. When the first two iterations you have done with the intent, right, then you can take the next variable you can put the next value in the array with a favorable value that is going to help you in the interpretation, right? Suppose you take a very big example over here and it does not really align very well with the question that you were trying to solve, and you go through the iteration, you did not get any answer and you are very sad. That is not very good, right? After two iterations, you will be able to get a better view. You'll be able to sense the patterns of the code, right? So that is what I'm trying to say. Only fill out the first two and then go through iterations, right? And then you will assign values that are in favor of your interpretation. It reduces the time that you're going to take, right? So now we are going to do what? So code is starting, and this is the initial condition, and we are checking that xi is equals to first, right? Both of these conditions are not going to be met because they are first and second are equal to 0, and this is positive integer array. So this is not going to be met. We get to here, else part, we assign the value q to len2, okay, and we assign len1 the value of 1, okay, and second is equals to first. We do not need to interpret this because we have already understood the intent of first, second. We can solve this by the intent, right? So now control comes over here, first is assigned, we can ignore this assignation, and when we come over here, then we are given the intent of len1 and len2, right? So len1 is going to be equal to what? Currently xi points over here, there are no preceding xi's over here, right? So because there are no preceding xi's, value equal to 1 before this, so len1 is going to be what? It is going to be equal to 1, and that is what has been done at this line. That is correct. Now len2. Len2 is going to hold the value of what? There are no preceding neither xi nor a secondary value being y. So there are no such preceding elements. So its length is also going to be equal to what? 1. Now q must give the value of 1 at the initial iteration, right? So we get a kind of value of q which is equals to 1. Now don't rush yourself. It only gives 1 at the initial iteration, right? It can also be a kind of a variable could be added to this, right? A kind of variable could be added to this that is taking the value 0, right? A lot of variables exist that are holding the value 0 right now. These first and second being one example, then when len2 at this point we're holding the value of 0, right? So it could be anything. Now one more trick. First and second are holding the value of the particular entries of the array, right? While len1 and len2 are holding the value of the length of an array, right? The length of an array. So they are having equal dimensions, but they are expressing different things. So right in this blank, they could never be first, could not never come over here, neither could second. That is very clear. But len1 and len2 could come over here, right? That is also very clear. Very good. Now that part is done. So let's go on with that, right? Let's go on with that. The second interpretation, right? Let's go to the second one. At this point, because we know the intent, first is going to be assigned over here, xi is going to be incremented, second is still the same, right? Because xi and fi and xi are not really are not same at this point. No, I did it wrong. Sorry. The intent I know, right? So xi and fi are not same at this point. So second is assigned the value of fi, which is 0. That is the intent of second. Now xi LU of fi is equal to xi, and then xi is incremented. That is the behavior of these, right? That is the intent of these. I'm not seeing the code, mind you. I know the intent, so I'm doing it like that. The second iteration comes around, and we are checking that is xi is equals to fi. Not really, they are not same. So we come over here. Is xi is equal to second? Not really. Second is equal to 0 and xi is equal to 2. Not really. So we come over here in the else part, right? Now len2 is equals to q. Okay. So, and q we know as 1. We don't know this part, right? So if that were to be the case, then len2 is going to hold the value of 1 only. Right now I'm taking this as 0. Okay. Now len1 is assigned the value of 1. Fine. And second is made equal to first. Fine. This is the part. The intent of this part, and then second is made equal to this, and xi is going to be incremented. Then we come to this portion one more time, and now we know the behavior of these two, right? The intent of these two, so we can directly guess the value, right? So len1 is going to be equal to what? Before 2, how many 2's are coming? Not a single one, but the length of 2 itself is also going to be counted, because this is 1 xi. So it is going to hold the value of 1. That is correct. Now second, this xi and y arrangement, how many of that can be made? Length of 2 can be made, and its length, we now know its value is going to be equal to what? It's going to be equal to 2. Now the thing about here is the value of len1 and len2, both of them were equal to what? Both of them were equal to your 1 at this point. So both len1 and len2, if they were to be present over here, it is going to give the value of q as 2 at this point. So we cannot interpret the value of q right now. So we need to introduce another value over here, right? We need to introduce another value. That is correct. But mind you, because you've gone through 2 iterations, you know how the code behaves. So you would be able to, obviously depending upon how much practice that you have. If you have completely new, maybe you will not be able to interpret it. But if you follow along anything, even a movie plot, if you follow along with attention, you would be able to do that, right? So if you're not able to do that, rewatch till this part of this video, right? What I am saying that you would be able to guess is that how will the code come inside of this else part, right? When this and this condition are not the same, right? So when first and second is not equals to your current xi's value, that is the only case when you're going to come to this else part, right? For that to be the case, it has to have a separate value. So let's put a value of 3 over here. With this value 3, we are 100% sure that the control is going to get over here, right? And because this control is getting over here, then what? Then q is assigned the value of len2, right? Now if len1 were to be here, then at that, with that being there, the value of q is going to become 2. But with len2 being here, the value of q will become 3, because 2 plus 1 is 3. Fine. We do that and then come at the end of it, right? We do the manipulation. We take this first over here. We take this second, because first and 2 and 3 were not equal. So we're going to assign second over here. It is going to hold the previous value of fi first. If first and xi are not same, that is the intent of second, right? So that is, once that is done, right, at this point, what value is that is going to be the len2. Len2 is going to hold the value of see, before 3, how many of these arrangements are present? Y and then xi, right? And then either 2 or 3 has to be either this 2 has to be repeated or 3 has to come. This is neither one of them. So len2 is going to hold the value of 2, right? and there is only one of these variable getting over here that is going to give us a value of 2 over here, and that is which one? That is len1. len2 if present over here is going to give a value of 3. So we know that the len1 is going to come over here, right? You may think that why not just directly introduce a 1 over here, right? If I were to introduce a 1 directly over here, then in the first iteration that I did, it is q is going to hold the value of 2 for xi being present at the first, and that is basically wrong, right? len2 has to be equal to 1 at that point. So hence a variable has to come over here, that is clear, and that variable has to be one of these because they are the only length holding variables, right? So that part is, once that part is done, so we get to what? Which one of the options hold 1 plus len1 for q? This option and this option. So the options, that is A and C, we can cut. They are not part of the options that we have to consider for the answer, right? Now what? Now we can go on iterations. We want the control to get inside of this block now because we want to find P. Because we have gone through few iterations, we can guess the next term. Xi is going to be incremented, right? We can guess the next term and directly know what kind of value we're going to fit over here for the control to get over here. And that is that we can make xi equal to second, for which the control is going to get over here, right? And second is holding the value of 2. So we can directly introduce 2 over here. Okay. With this 2 being present, what will happen, right? What will happen? Length 2 plus plus, right? Length 2 plus plus. So this 2 is made equal to 3. Okay. So this is made equal to 3. And len1 is equals to P. And second is, this second part we can not consider because we have understood its behavior, we can directly follow. Okay. So now what? This len1 and len2 were did. So this, some change would have happened to this. I don't know what, right? But let's just not change it. Let's see how the behavior goes. And then we get to the end again. len2 is going to hold the value of what? Before 2, what or number of this kind of sequence exists, right? So 2 is here, then 3, y, this being y, and then 2 again, right? So this is 3. That is what len2 is holding. Very good. Validation, that is not very important, but still it is a validation of the original intent of the code. Okay. Now, for len1 is going to hold the value of what? Before 2, how many 2s are present? Not a single one. This single entry is going, is the only thing that we are going to consider. So len1 must be equal to 1. Okay. So this value is 1. So by this analysis, P is equals to 1 plus something. Okay. Now you may say that let's take the value of len1 and len2 here and then consider if len1 were to be present over here. See, neither of them, this is the value that len1 held, right? This is the value of that L2 held because this increment happened before this, right? So if 3 were to be introduced over here, P is going to become equal, len1 is going to become equal to 4, and that is not the desired value. If 1 were to be present over here, basically right over here, I'm saying that len1 were to be present. Did I say it wrong? I don't know, but if len2 present over here, then 1 plus 3 is giving us 4. If len1 is present over here, then 1 plus 1 is giving us 2, and both of them are not the value that len1 should hold, that is 1. So we can directly say that no value is going to come over here and P is just equals to 1. We know both of these values. Which of the option meets this criteria, meet these values? This is the only option that meets this criteria, right? And with that, this question is solved. I know that it took a lot of time for me to explain it, but the explanation part was the thing that was taking time. If you master all the techniques which I did used in this question, and you are in full practice in solving questions of programming, you can solve this whole question within 2 to 3 minutes, if I do say it myself. But if you are not that much in practice, then I will remind you that this is a time eating question. It will eat away your time, and the overall arrangement of marks, the score that you will going to get if you waste time on this is going to be less. So do identify that this is a time consuming question and only attempt it at the very end of your paper, right? And with that, I hope you a very good day, and I will see you in the next one.